Part 25. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 241. You don't have to worry about doing such a small thing for me. Now there are only two of you and me in this world. However, I only recently found out the bloodline of our G family. It is the blood of our G family. At this time, after King Zhou heard what King Guzhu said, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and his eyes were full of surprise. His eyes were fixed on King Guzhu, and his eyebrows were he was quite excited. Are you telling the truth? It's the blood of our G family, right? It's the blood of our G family, right? King Guzhu nodded gently. It is undoubtedly the blood of our G family, but just what? After King Guzhu and King Zhou told King Zhou everything about what had just happened, King Zhou half squinted his eyes, a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes, and in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, there was a complete expression of confusion. It's all a kind of confusion. No, it seems a little weird. They are fine, why did they take you away? After King Zhou finished speaking, he turned his head and glanced at King Guzhu, with a gloomy look in his eyes. At this time, King Guzhu's face looked a bit ugly. He shook his head. I don't know what the reason is, but looking at them shouldn't hurt you or. I hope so. The world today is not like the world back then. The world back then belonged to our G family, but it is different now. After all, we still need to take care of our eyesight in all aspects. At this time, King Guzhu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He glanced at King Zhou and said, "Brother, have you seen that little guy?" "You mean that little guy named Lin Yu, right?" King Zhou nodded gently. "I have seen him before. This little guy is very smart, and he has a calmness that does not suit his age. He is a little too calm, so calm that it makes people suspicious." King Zhou spoke unhurriedly like this. At this time, King Guzhu, after hearing that King Zhou had such a high opinion of Lin Yu, was able to conclude that his brother had probably met that little boy. "Guy. I didn't expect you, brother, to have such a high opinion of this little guy. I'm really surprised to know that." King Zhou just waved his hand gently and smiled. We always have to admit that the waves in the Yangtze River push the waves in front, and the waves in front die on the beach. Isn't this the truth?" At this time, King Zhou just picked up the kettle that was boiling water, and then poured the boiling water into the teapot. The tea leaves rose and fell 3 times. King Zhou gently picked up the teapot, took a sip of the refreshing aroma, and it went straight to the heart. To say that this tea is like life, you have to withstand the ups and downs before you can brew a good pot of tea. The same is true for life. Life is like a dream, and the dream disappears in a blink of an eye. Many things cannot be explained. It's impossible to talk about it. At this time, King Guzhu just laughed and said nothing after hearing what King Zhou said. Of course, he knew what his brother meant by what he said. He knew even more about what his brother had experienced. What an ups and downs. King Guzhu stood up slowly. "Brother, what if one day I become your enemy?" After King Zhou heard what King Guzhu said, he was stunned for an instant, and then he shook his head and smiled. "No, that day won't happen, I won't let it happen. You became my enemy." "What if?" "No ifs." King Zhou was decisive, with a certain determination in his eyes, and then he picked up the teapot and poured 2 cups of tea. "The tea is ready, let's try my tea-making skills." After King Guzhu heard what King Zhou said, he nodded slightly and smiled. "It's really time to try my brother's craftsmanship." The two people just looked at each other and smiled. King Zhou drank the cup of tea in front of him in one gulp. It is indeed good tea. At this time, Lin Yu summoned the space-time beast in front of him. The space-time beast looked at so many rare medicinal materials in front of him, his eyes were a little straight, and he was even more excited in his heart. Lin Yu just smiled when he saw the time and space beast like this. Looking at your appearance of having never seen the world, why are you so excited? After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast also had 3 black lines on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. I am not like the master. You are so knowledgeable and can see everything. There are so many rare medicinal materials. I have never seen so many rare treasures and so many precious medicinal materials in my life. This flattery was quite useful to Lin Yu. Lin Yu just waved his hand and smiled. These are all yours now. After swallowing them all, are you confident that you can break through to the epic realm? Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at the space-time beast, with a somewhat complicated meaning in his eyes. After thinking for a moment, the space-time beast nodded slightly. Of course I have confidence. Lin Yu nodded with satisfaction. Very good, just have confidence. If you are confident that you can break through, then these will all be yours. At this moment, the space-time beast seemed to be in the ocean of medicinal herbs. The excitement in the space-time beast's heart was naturally indescribable. Lin Yu was also very excited. You know, the space-time beast is only at the level of the domain lord now, but it is already so powerful. He really can't imagine how powerful the space-time beast will be if it really reaches the epic realm. At this time, the space-time beast suddenly closed his eyes. He operated his own skills, and then began to swallow these rare medicinal herbs. These medicinal herbs seemed to be free, and the space-time beast poured them into his mouth desperately. At this time, the patterns on the space-time beast's body began to become more complicated than before. The patterns on the space-time beast's body began to have a dark red color, which gradually turned into a golden color. This pattern gradually began to solidify, and finally changed from this golden color to this red and black color. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with disbelief, and he frowned slightly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 242. No, why do I always feel a little strange? What's going on? When Lin Yu thought of this, his eyes seemed to flash with some complexity, and then his brows froze together. At this moment, he was like a monk who was at a loss. Lin Yu half closed his eyes and thought for a moment. It was as if he suddenly discovered something. At this time, he raised a meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth, and then nodded with satisfaction. So that's it, the time-space beast is actually mutating. This is exactly what I expected. At this moment, Lin Yu's eyes and eyebrows were full of a sense of faith, and his eyes began to brighten. Lin Yu's mouth corners slightly raised, and a little bit of evil charm was raised. Interesting, now it's getting more and more interesting. At first, the space-time beast didn't notice anything wrong, but later, the space-time beast's face began to become more and more ugly, and the space-time beast's face began to become ferocious little by little. At this time, the space-time beast let out a low roar, and after hearing this roar, Lin Yu was naturally very distressed. If you can't hold on, it's better not to break through by force, and don't be stubborn. The space-time beast shook his head. I can hold on, this time I will definitely reach the epic realm. At this time, the space-time beast just finished speaking, and then his face began to become gradually ferocious, and his blood began to flow out from the cracks in his skin. The blood that flowed out showed a kind of red color, which made people look quite scary and terrible. The space-time beast arrived, and then his face became more and more ugly. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu was naturally very distressed. Stop it quickly, don't hold on any longer. If you hold on any longer, you will die. The space-time beast turned his head and looked at Lin Yu, and suddenly a sad smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. I want to fight, I will never be a waste, I want to prove myself, I want to prove my own strength. Lin Yu's eyes were slightly red. At this time, after hearing what the space-time beast said, he was quite excited and emotional. After a moment, he also nodded slightly. Okay, I believe you can do it, I believe you. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast seemed to have received great encouragement. At this time, the space-time beast let out a low hum, and then the skin on his body began to become firm little by little. At this moment, the space-time beast suddenly let out an angry roar, which resounded through the heavens and earth, striking everyone's soul, causing everyone's soul to tremble slightly. After hearing the voice of the space-time beast, the faces of the participating team members instantly became ugly. They looked at each other, and the fear in their eyes could not be concealed at all. Whose powerful beast is this? I'm afraid that no matter who has such a powerful beast, we may not be his opponent in this expedition. The people of Country M looked at each other, their eyes full of frustration. For them, it is stupid to do things that they know will fail, because they only do things that can succeed, which is a bit funny. At this time, a person suddenly stood up and walked straight outside. John, what are you going to do? Of course I'm going to give up, idiot. The other party has such a powerful beast. We can never be their opponent. If we insist on fighting them, then we will only be humiliating ourselves. What's the point of humiliating ourselves? John's eyes flashed with a strange color. At this time, after hearing what John said, the other people looked at each other for a moment, and then they followed John and walked out. At this moment, after hearing this soul-piercing voice, the people of Country E also began to look ugly. At this time, they looked at each other, and their eyes and eyebrows were full of helplessness. What should we do now? Our beasts are definitely not a match for such a powerful beast. Whether it is the players from other countries or the beasts in this tomb, it is difficult for us to defeat them. If you say so, why not just run away now? Being a deserter might not be a bad idea. Eva Flovsky turned around and looked at everyone. Everyone looked at each other. After hesitating for a moment, they walked out together. There were players from 9 countries in total, and 8 of them chose to give up at the same time. Only the people from Dragon Country still insisted. They firmly believed that no matter whether the beast was from the opponent or in the tomb, as long as they were still alive, they would have a way. At this time, the people watching the live broadcast all over the world saw the players from other countries give up one after another, and saw the players from Dragon Country still sticking to the spirit of perseverance on the field, which moved everyone. Dragon Country is really a magical country. At this moment, Country H was at a high-level meeting. What should we do now? The first season of the expedition is coming to an end, but for us, not only did we not get any benefits, but our secrets were leaked. Although we have found a scapegoat, other countries have begun to pay attention to us, and the next thing will be even more difficult. All the parliamentarians looked at each other at this moment, and no one dared to say anything, because they were all afraid that they would make mistakes if they said too much. What if something went wrong? At that time, the gain would outweigh the loss. At this time, after their leader saw this scene, a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes. He glanced back and forth at these people, and a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. Assholes, a bunch of assholes, now you tell me an answer again, what should we do next? All those people kept silent, no one dared to speak first, no one dared to say anything, and at this time, the man was like a deflated ball, slumped in the chair. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 243. And at this moment, the door was suddenly pushed open, and a guy in a black robe appeared in front of everyone. The man just glanced back and forth around the corner of his mouth, it evoked a faint smile. At this moment, all the congressmen looked at each other. After seeing this guy, their eyes were full of confusion. Who are you? Why, and why are you here with us? Those people are like ducks with fried feathers. After all, the security measures here are sufficient, and now this mysterious man breaks in so quietly. If this mysterious man wants to harm them, most of them will have already done it by now. Became a corpse. The man in black robe didn't pay attention to these bored ants. Instead, he sat on a chair and crossed his legs. Everyone stood up one after another, and at this moment their hands and heads slammed the table. Quiet. After everyone heard the leader's voice, their eyes were quite confused. However, at this moment, they followed the leader's wishes and really became quiet. What are you doing here? The leader's eyes were staring straight at the man in black robe, and at this time, after the man in black robe heard what the leader said, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Of course I'm here to help you. You are in a very difficult situation now, and I know it, so I am ready to help you now. What do you think? After hearing what the man in black robe said, the leader's eyes were full of excitement. His eyes were staring straight at the man in black robe, as if they were about to sparkle. That's great, I don't know how you want to help me. The man in black robe just smiled. It's very simple, muddy the water in advance. Only when the water is muddy enough can we fish in troubled waters. No, now you are the only ones practicing evil arts and raising dark beasts in captivity. Of course it won't work, but if several other major countries have also begun to keep dark beasts in captivity, will you still stand out when the time comes? The man in black robe had a smile on his face, and after hearing what the man in black robe said, the leader nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Yes, you are indeed right. At this time, the man in black robe turned his head and glanced at the leader. His eyes seemed to be looking at an idiot, but fortunately his hat blocked his gaze. Otherwise, I am afraid that the leader at this moment would have been too big. Get hit. If this matter is originally black, as long as you let enough people become black with you, then these black things will become white, and those things that cannot be put on the table will be gradually we can put it on the table. At this time, the leader nodded heavily, and then looked thoughtful. And just after this moment, the man in black robe slowly stood up and walked outside. All the members looked at each other. Even the leader was very curious at this time. Why did the man in black robe suddenly appear this time? In front of the public, he had no way to control this man in black robe, so he simply stopped making random suspicions. In the tomb. At this time, after the time and space beast roared, his aura began to surge suddenly, and then his skin, which originally showed a blue-gray color, now actually revealed a faint purple. The patterns on the space beast have become a little more complicated than before. At this moment, Lin Yu wanted to see these patterns clearly. Even if he moved his mind a little closer to them, Lin Yu felt a strong attraction, as if he wanted to completely pull his soul in. One of the same. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes had a somewhat complicated meaning. Just after this moment, the space-time beast was filled with joy and he jumped directly in front of Lin Yu. I have broken through to the epic realm, but it's a pity that I didn't get any talents and skills this time. At this time, the sky beast looked frustrated. Lin Yu just smiled. It's not easy for you to break through to the epic realm in one fell swoop. If others hear you say this, I'm afraid they will be pissed to death. At this moment, the space-time beast was laughing like this, with a strange color flashing in his eyes, and then it seemed as if he suddenly remembered something. Although I don't have any awakening talent skills, I got a life-saving magic weapon. That magic weapon seems to be connected to my soul, and it's called Soul Cone. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he was stunned on the spot at first, and then almost jumped up. His eyes were staring at the space-time beast. What? You said you after awakening the soul cone, can I directly attack the souls of other beasts? Seeing Lin Yu's excited expression, the space-time beast nodded slightly at that time. That's right, not only can it directly attack the souls of other alien beasts, but you can even use it to attack the souls of humans. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, the corners of his eyes and brows were filled with a sense of excitement. At this time, he just nodded so heavily, "That's great, it's simply wonderful. It's simply wonderful." At this time, the space-time beast just smiled and didn't say anything more. After waiting for this moment, Lin Yu suddenly seemed to remember something. "Can you travel through time and space at will now?" When the space-time beast heard what Lin Yu said, a complex look flashed in his eyes. "It shouldn't be possible to travel through time and space at will, but you can specifically grasp a certain approximate range in time and space, but you can't be precise." The voice of the space-time beast became smaller and smaller at the end, but Lin Yu became more and more excited after hearing what the space-time beast said. "Great, that's good, that's good." At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to be a little incoherent. The space-time beast looked at his master like this, and his eyes were full of confusion. He couldn't understand why his master was like this now. "Master, what do you want to do?" Lin Yu smiled pretentiously. "The secret cannot be revealed, but you will know what I want to do when the time comes." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 244. Say it in advance. Traveling through time and space will consume a lot of money. When the time comes, you have to provide enough of these rare and precious medicinal materials. If you don't provide enough, I won't do it. The space-time beast just muttered softly. Of course, these things are given by that person to help you break through. As long as you can meet his requirements, he won't treat you badly. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast nodded gently, and then smiled so brightly. Lin Yu looked at the space-time beast like a child, with some complexity flashing in his eyes. At this moment, Lin Yu really didn't know what he was thinking. After a moment, he just smiled and glanced at the space-time beast. "Try to hide the fact that you have a soul attack method from now on. Traveling through time and space is already very unnatural. If others know that you have a soul attack method, if they use any means, I'm afraid they will use all their resources to capture you," Lin Yu said in a deep voice. Of course the space-time beast understood what Lin Yu meant, so he nodded gently. "Master, don't worry, I have my own sense of discretion." At this time, King Zhou suddenly appeared next to Lin Yu. At this moment, King Zhou looked at the space-time beast in front of Lin Yu. A bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. At this moment, his eyes were full of desire and greed. For some reason, Lin Yu suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart. At this moment, he just coughed lightly. "Ahem, now the time and space beast has been upgraded, if you can continue to travel through time and space." After King Zhou heard what Lin Yu said, he nodded with satisfaction. At this moment, the King of Guzhu looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. Lin Yu was really shuddering when he stared at him, and Lin Yu just smiled. "I wonder if De Wang has any instructions." The King of Guzhu looked at Lin Yu and waved his hand casually, with a hint of teasing in the corners of his eyes and brows. "I didn't expect that you, the real person, would actually have such a beast. I didn't expect it." Lin Yu just nodded his head lightly and smiled. "Ha ha ha, even now, I have never had the conditions. The King of Guzhu has summoned his own strange beast. Maybe it's because Lord Guzhou's strange beasts are too heaven-defying." When King Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, a special color flashed through his eyes, and then he shook his head slightly and smiled. "Ha ha ha, maybe so, wait until you will know everything by then, so there is no need to worry now." Lin Yu nodded lightly, and then said nothing more. And just after this moment, King Guzhu seemed to suddenly discover something. "This space-time beast can travel through time and space, but brother, do you know where my sister-in-law's soul is now?" After King Zhou heard what King Guzhu said, he sighed heavily, with a bitter smile on his lips, and a look of helplessness in his eyes. "I don't know, But I do have a way. Maybe I can try to deduce it once. If I can deduce it, everyone will be happy. If I can't deduce it, it may just be fate. At this time, King Joyu seemed to have made a great determination. At this time, King Guzhu just walked to King Joyu and patted his shoulder gently, with a bit of perseverance flashing in his eyes. I believe your brother can definitely do it. After King Joyu heard what King Guzhu said, a strange light seemed to flash in his eyes, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly, and a moment later he nodded lightly and smiled. Okay, this time big brother will borrow your good words. But at this moment, a figure in the distance suddenly ran towards him. The man was so strange that no one could see his movements clearly. At this time, after Lin Yu saw the man's face clearly, his face looked like this. He was suddenly startled, and there was a flash of confusion in his eyes. It was unbelievable. Who else could this be if he wasn't General Yin Yang? After General Yin Yang saw King Joyu, his eyes were even more excited, with tears streaming down his face. King Joyu turned his head and glanced towards General Yin Yang. A faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a special color flashed in his eyes. General Yin Yang plopped down. He just fell to his knees on the ground. Meet King Joyu. King Joyu just waved lightly, no need to be so generous, get up quickly. At this time, General Yin Yang slowly stood up after hearing King Joyu's settings. King Joyu turned his head and glanced at General Yin Yang. There's something I need to ask you. What happened? Where was the place where my empress died? General Yin Yang heard this, and after King Joyu said this, a few memories flashed across his face. After thinking for a moment, he frowned together, and then a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. After King Joyu saw this scene, he immediately understood that General Yin and Yang probably didn't know the ins and outs of this matter at this time. You don't know. At the Yang's Inn platform, General Yin Yang had not spoken yet, but at this moment the King of Guzhu was the first to speak. After King Joyu heard what King Guzhu said, he turned his head and glanced at King Guzhu. There seemed to be some complicated meaning flashing in his eyes. How did you know? If I guessed correctly, you should have followed me on the expedition. Now that you have followed me on the expedition, how do you know these things so clearly? King Joyu's eyes were fixed on King Guzhu, and a cold aura quietly emerged. At this time, the King of Guzhu just scratched his head. Actually, the reason why I knew about this matter was entirely because I knew that my brother would definitely be worried about his sister-in-law, so I sneaked back secretly, hoping to take my sister-in-law away. I was rescued, but I didn't want to. When King Guzhu said this, a bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 245. King Joyu nodded so gently, a special color flashed in his eyes and brows were completely myopic, a sense of helplessness, and then he sighed heavily. Oh, all of this is due to fate and good fortune. I can't blame others, I can only blame myself. I didn't control the situation well at the beginning, so it became like this. I will deduce that later. A moment of time, but it may not be possible to deduce the location. King Joyu said softly like this. Lin Yu was also moved by King Joyu's infatuation, but for some reason, he always felt that King Joyu's purpose was not that simple this time, because he could see it from King Joyu's eyes. It's just unlimited desire. As for the reason for this, even Lin Yu himself couldn't figure it out. What's going on with King Yu of Zhou? It's weird, it's simply weird. King Joyu seemed to understand what Lin Yu said. He turned his head and smiled at Lin Yu. Is it possible that you have some concerns, little friend? After Lin Yu heard what King Joyu said, he just waved his hand and shook his head. No worries, not really. It's okay if you don't have any concerns. If you have any concerns, Feel free to tell me then. There seemed to be something in King Zhou words, but Lin Yu didn't understand what King Zhou meant at this moment. A moment later, King Zhou sat cross-legged, and then clasped his hands together, constantly changing gestures in front of him. King Zhou's gestures were very fast, making people feel a bit overwhelmed. After Lin Yu saw this scene, a special color flashed in his eyes. And a moment later, Zhou Yawang's face suddenly darkened, his face suddenly turned pale, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. King Zhou's face turned pale for a while. At this moment, he frowned. How could this be possible? No, absolutely not. Could it be that there is something terrifying around her? When King Zhou thought of this, it was as if he suddenly remembered something, and a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes. I understand, maybe so. After King Zhou thought of this, he closed his eyes again and sketched a few simple lines. Then the next second, a thunderbolt struck directly at King Zhou's Tianling cap. Immediately afterwards, Lin Yu felt that his soul was in a trance, and the next second he lost consciousness. And now in the Dragon Kingdom. Because the first season's adventure was about to end, those players who were injured and those who abstained went directly back to the healthcare areas in their own countries. Chen Bing and Wang Yu did not come back. Apart from the two of them, Bai Mu was still alive and dead, and Bai Han was also the first to abstain. After Bai Han came back alone, a man in military uniform met him. The man's eyes were scanning Bai Han's body back and forth, but he was not angry or intimidating. His appearance was that of Bai Han, and he was a little panicked in his heart. The man turned his head and smiled towards Bai Han. You don't have to be afraid, I don't have any ill intentions towards you, there's just something you need to tell me. Bai Han heard this. After the man finished saying this, a special color flashed in his eyes, and then he nodded gently. I don't know why, although the man looked amiable, he gave Bai Han felt a very frightened feeling. This feeling is so magical that even Bai Han himself can't figure out why he feels like this. If you have anything to ask, just ask, and I will definitely tell you everything I know. After hearing what Bai Han said, the man just smiled softly, then turned his head and glanced at Bai Han. You don't need to be so nervous, I don't eat people, I'm just curious. There seems to be a guy named Lin Yu in your team. That little guy's performance is very impressive. Do you know his origin and background? Bai Han heard this, and after the man said this, his face was slightly startled, and a bit of complicated meaning flashed in his eyes. To be honest, I don't know that guy very well, so there are some things that I don't know either. I understand very well. And we didn't have that guy in our team originally, but that guy just appeared out of nowhere. After the man heard what Bai Han said, something strange flashed in his eyes, and then he nodded gently. I see, now I understand a little bit. Okay, thank you for telling me about this time. You can have a good rest. I won't disturb your rest for now. After the man finished speaking, he turned around and left. Bai Han's eyes stared straight at the man's back, a few complex colors flashed in his eyes, and then he smiled. This kind of big shot just doesn't know what his identity is. But at this moment, a person walked towards him. Bai Han turned his head and glanced at the person. Chief Instructor. At this time, Bai Han just wanted to sit up, but the man just waved his hand gently. Bai Han's mouth curled up a bit of a bitter smile. Seeing how weak I am now, I feel a little embarrassed. The man he called the chief instructor, after hearing what he said, just waved his hand lightly. You are a hero now, you can't say that. Bai Han's mouth curled up a bit of a bitter smile. What kind of hero am I? I feel helpless just thinking about it. But I really don't have any impression of that little guy. I don't know what that guy is. How did he get in? Do any of you know the details of that guy? The chief instructor glanced at Bai Han, with a bit of confusion in his eyes, and at this time Bai Han just shook his head and smiled. What is the background of that guy? To be honest, even I don't know much, but I always feel that this guy seems to be a little abnormal. After hearing what Baihan said, the chief instructor's eyes flashed with excitement. Not normal? Then come and tell me, what do you think is a little abnormal about that guy? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 246. For the chief instructor, it is better to have news than no news. At this time, after hearing what the chief instructor said, Baihan began to recall everything about Lin Yu. In fact, it's just that the guy's strength is a little abnormal. It's really terrifying to a degree that makes people smack their tongues. The strange beasts on him are probably not even your rank. The religious officer rubbed his chin, and then nodded gently. What you said is indeed half true. To be honest, even I feel a little envious of the strange beasts on this little guy. After thinking about this, the religious officer's eyes evoked some special colors. In the tomb. At this moment, Lin Yu was attracted by the sky thunder and fainted instantly. After King Zhou Yu saw this scene, his eyes were full of excitement. Ha ha ha, it seems that I succeeded this time. After hearing what King Zhou Yu said, King Guzhu was full of confusion and puzzlement. He couldn't understand why King Zhou Yu said that and why Lin Yu fainted. Brother, what's going on? At this moment, King Zhou Yu looked mysterious. The secret of heaven cannot be leaked. At this moment, the time and space beast wrapped Lin Yu's soul and wandered carefully in this time. The power of the previous thunder was too great. He could only hide in this time and space to avoid the power of heaven's punishment from hurting Lin Yu's origin. This perverted method, I'm afraid, can only be used by Lin Yu who has the time and space beast. If it is an ordinary person, I'm afraid he can only do nothing when encountering such a thing. When the time and space beast was at a certain time node, he found that Lin Yu suddenly flashed a colorful light. At this time, the time and space beast quickly took Lin Yu's soul and hid in this time and space. It's really a bit strange, I can't explain it, and I can't figure it out. After the space-time beast got into it, he felt an irresistible force at this time, which directly carried Lin Yu's soul to a certain place. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly woke up, but when he woke up and saw everything in front of him, his face was shocked. At this time, Lin Yu looked at the beautiful woman in front of him, and he felt his mind was shaken. At this time, he could clearly perceive that this body was not his own, and he could not control any actions of this body. But he could really feel everything that happened on this body. Lin Yu slowly woke up, and he turned his head and looked to the side. The place before was really too weird. Most of the prehistoric beasts would die there. But I didn't notice the secret of so many people being killed recently. I think I am a sinner. Nuwa smiled. How can I blame my husband for this? But other things are not important at the moment. The most important thing is that we open a temple outside the domain. Lin Yu nodded gently. Yes, after your teachings, those beasts may have a higher chance of survival there. At this time, Lin Yu could clearly sense the power of the woman in front of him, and looking at her snake-like body, Lin Yu boldly speculated that this person was most likely Nuwa. But Lin Yu never expected that this girl would call her husband. At this moment, he felt that his mind was a little difficult to control. Master, be careful. Your soul power is consumed very quickly. Don't have too much fluctuation, otherwise, you may not be able to get out of here. Arya's voice sounded in Lin Yu's mind. At this time, Lin Yu was also slightly stunned at first, but then he nodded gently. I know. Nuwa summoned everyone. Lin Yu looked around and glanced. Today, I summoned you here for only one purpose, that is, to open an out-of-domain dojo. After all, The monsters that came out of that place are madly killing the strange beasts in our prehistoric world. We must not let them go on like this." The immortals looked at each other, and a bit of solemnity flashed in their eyes. After all, they knew the horror of those monsters very well, so they didn't want to wade into this muddy water. But now they have to shoot the arrow on the string. After all, with the existence of Nuwa, they have to look at the face of the Buddha. If it was before this, Lin Yu would never dare to say so. But now, things are different. Now, beside Lin Yu, there is a strong person like Nuwa, and she looks like a newlywed little woman who only obeys her husband's orders. However, all these immortals still don't know the true identity of Lin Yu beside Nuwa, and although these people gathered together this time, it seems to be a face for Nuwa. But the purpose of these people coming is not simple. Although on the surface they come to congratulate Nuwa, open a Taoist temple, and prove the truth, in fact they want to see Nuwa's joke. "I don't know who this person is. Doesn't the Queen of Nuwa introduce him?" Dijun glanced at Lin Yu and said in a cold voice, with a bit of disdain in his words. Nuwa was about to get angry. After all, no one could despise her man like this. Lin Yu took a step forward. 300 million years ago, I still remember that when I shot the sun, it caused quite a stir in your Jinwu world, and some people even peed their pants because of it. Dijun's face turned red. "You? How do I know, right? Good and evil will eventually be rewarded, and there will be reincarnation in heaven. You will have to pay for what you have done sooner or later. Who told you not to have good intentions?" The people around laughed. Although it was a small matter, it also showed that the man who could do Nuwa was naturally not an ordinary person. This Taoist friend is really amazing. He can know such a secret thing. "Dijun, we have been friends for so many years, but you didn't tell me that you have been scared to pee your pants." Lin Yu looked at the guy in front of him. The two of them seemed to have a connection in the dark. Even Lin Yu was very curious about how he knew the first sentence of peeing in his pants. After a moment, Lin Yu was just speechless. It turned out that this matter was actually told to Lin Yu by Nuwa back then, and now he said it directly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 247. Emperor Jun's face turned red, and then he waved his hand and laughed awkwardly a few times. "It's been so many years, why bother with him?" Emperor Jun was just a little arrogant, so after his arrogance was eliminated, he became honest. But there was another person among them, and that person was Zhen Yuanzi. Zhen Yuanzi looked as if Lin Yu had killed his father and robbed his mother, and his eyes seemed to be about to spit out flames. Lin Yu could see that Zhen Yuanzi's eyes were always staring at his arm that was hugging Nuwa's slender waist. The corners of Lin Yu's mouth deliberately raised a hint of evil charm, and the strength of Xianji's hand became a little heavier again, as if he was deliberately declaring his sovereignty. After seeing this scene, the people around him also raised a few meaningful smiles at the corners of their mouths. They wanted to see how Zhen Yuanzi would react after chasing Nuwa for so many years and now that Nuwa had a boyfriend. Zhen Yuanzi took a deep breath. "I wonder what this fellow Taoist's identity is." Lin Yu just pecked Nuwa's face lightly. "As you can see, I am just an ordinary person, my status is not noble, but my wife and I are truly in love." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he gently lifted Nuwa's pretty face, and then kissed her suddenly. Nuwa felt as if she had lost all her strength at this moment, and she collapsed directly in Lin Yu's arms. Provocation, blatant provocation. Zhen Yuanzi only felt that his three corpse gods were jumping up and down, and his eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of cold murderous intent. At this moment, Zhen Yuanzi thought, "I must kill you, you dare to treat my woman like this, you deserve to die." And at this moment, Lin Yu just liked to see those people who were angry with him, but couldn't do anything to him. At this time, Lin Yu thought in his heart, come on, come on, come on, bite me, you are just a waste who has not yet achieved sainthood, and you actually want to snatch my wife from me, it's ridiculous. After kissing for a while, the people around couldn't stand it anymore. A figure rushed over from a distance. This person was none other than Nuwa's brother Fuxi. Even though Fuxi saw the two of them so sweet and loving, and although he also blessed them in his heart, after all, he was in public, so he still coughed lightly. Nuwa came back to her senses in an instant and pushed Lin Yu away lightly. Lin Yu was also a drama queen. He deliberately pretended to be weak and actually lay down like this. After seeing this scene, Nuwa remembered that there was a huge difference in strength between the two of them, so she hurried to Lin Yu's side, her face full of concern. Husband, are you okay? I'm in trouble, very sad, and need a kiss from my wife. Nuwa just smiled and offered her red lips, but Lin Yu also knew the limits and knew that he had to restrain himself a little in front of these singles. After all, he would have to win them over later, of course, except for the bastard Zhen Yuanzi. When Zhen Yuanzi saw the two of them like this, he snorted coldly, and then walked away. Lin Yu just pecked Nuwa's face lightly, and then stood up. He spread his hands with a mean smile on his face. The defense is broken, Zhen Yuanzi is broken. I didn't expect him to be so low-key. After all, he is a Hunyuan Jinxian, only one step away from becoming a saint, but I didn't expect him to be so narrow-minded. 3 black lines appeared on the foreheads of all the people present, and at this moment they were thinking of one thing at the same time: you are so intimate with someone's beloved woman in front of her, and ordinary people don't raise their swords to cut you, which is considered to be well-mannered. However, these people have lived for such a long time, and they understand one thing more. From the time they met to now, it has only been a short half an hour, but now Zhen Yuanzi has directly confused Lin Yu's mind behind his back. I am afraid that without 100 years, this heart of Taoism may not be perfect again. All people firmly believe in one idea. Although Lin Yu's cultivation may not be enough at the moment, this person must be a very scary person in terms of both character and means. In addition, now that Nuwa loves him so much, Lin Yu can be said to have both strength and scheming at this time, and he will definitely achieve extraordinary success in the future. So when they thought of this, they stopped being so reserved, especially Dijun, who had just looked down on Lin Yu. He suddenly stepped forward and clasped his hands together. I was indeed a little arrogant just now, so to compensate you, I can give you the Tianyanjuamai pills that were bred in the water of the Styx at sunset. From the beginning of the prehistoric times to now, only 2 Tianyanjuamai pills have been produced. Because the output is too small, no one knows its true effect. Both of them were carried by Dijun, and even countless people wanted to take a look, but they were not allowed to. But at this time, he actually took out one and gave it to Lin Yu. After starting like this, the 3 pure ones also stepped forward. As soon as they thought about it, something appeared in their hands. If these treasures were placed in the present, they would definitely be worth a lot of money, but Lin Yu at that time didn't look down on them at all, and just threw them away and collected them. The group of people exchanged greetings for a while, and Lin Yu looked at Nuwa. You greet them here first. After all, these people are guests, so it's not easy to refute their reputation. I still have some things that I need to go out first. After Nuwa heard what Lin Yu said, she nodded slightly, a special color flashed in her eyes, and she opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she gave it up again. Swallowed it back like this. Lin Yu walked to a certain place, and then he pinched an extremely mysterious spell with both hands. Finally, Lin Yu's soul was forced out. At this moment, Lin Yu looked at himself in front of him, and he felt something in his heart. Quite surprised. You must be curious now, who am I and who are you? Why are the two of us related to the same place but not the same person? After Lin Yu heard what he said, he nodded slightly. Yes, who are you? I am somewhat familiar with you, but not so familiar with you. Do you know that feeling? Lin Yu laughed, ha ha ha, of course I understand what you mean. I brought you here today just to tell you a secret. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chang. Chapter 248. At this time, Lin Yu just felt a little confused in his heart. His eyes stared straight at the man, and a few special colors flashed in his eyes. In the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, there was a kind of puzzlement. I really don't know what you want to say to me. In just a moment, the man had brought Lin Yu to a desolate place. When Lin Yu just stepped into this desolate place, he felt a desolate air. This desolate air eroded his body everywhere, and his eyes couldn't help but flash a little confusion. I am originally a soul, but this endless desolate air keeps invading my body. What is going on? Lin Yu turned his head and stared at the man. The corners of the man's mouth even raised a few bitter smiles, and a few helpless meanings flashed in his eyes. What do you think? There is no vitality here. It is called the wilderness in the wilderness. There is nothing we can do about it. Who stole the vitality here? It is impossible for such a thing to happen for no reason. It is quite strange. Lin Yu stared at his ancient self with a hint of confusion. The man smiled bitterly and his eyes flashed with a special color. I can't tell you the details of the ins and outs of this matter at the moment. This should be a space-time rift. Do you know where this space-time rift leads to? Lin Yu certainly didn't know, so he couldn't help but shook his head at that time, with a hint of confusion in his eyes. At this time, the man, after seeing Lin Yu like this, just smiled, and then sighed heavily. Alas, I'm not afraid to tell you that this place is connected to the outside world. This outside world is extremely dangerous. I believe you should know it. After Lin Yu heard what the man said, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and his eyes were full of surprise. Is it true? The man nodded heavily. Absolutely true. But why is there no impact on the future? What's going on? If it's like what you said, I'm afraid our future should have been wiped out long ago. Lin Yu's eyes stared at the man, and a few strange colors flashed in his eyes. At this moment, the man suddenly smiled, turned his head, glanced at Lin Yu, and a few different lights flashed in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. I don't know what happened later. After all, I was able to predict your arrival 1,000 years later, which was already a very heaven-defying thing. If I try to know more, I'm afraid I will be punished by heaven. The man's eyes clearly flashed with a bit of fear. Lin Yu certainly understood what the man meant. At this time, he just raised his eyebrows slightly, and then nodded. What you said is really true, but I haven't heard of any rumors about this in the future. Maybe someone in the future has pacified these alien races. And at this time, Lin Yu suddenly remembered a legend before, which was the legend about Nuwa repairing the sky. When Lin Yu remembered this legend, his eyes seemed to flash with excitement, and his eyes suddenly became bright. I seem to know something. The man heard Lin Yu, and after he said this, a strange look flashed in his eyes, and then he stared at Lin Yu. What on earth did you remember? Nuwa repaired the sky. Nuwa repaired the sky. The man heard Lin Yu, and after he said this, his eyes were full of disbelief, and then he shook his head. Impossible, you are talking about my wife? But how could my wife do such a shocking thing? At this moment, after Lin Yu heard what the man said, the corners of his mouth also curled up a bit of a bitter smile, which was indeed true. If he knew that this matter was true, he would also feel that it was a bit mysterious and weird, and unbelievable, but this matter happened to be true. Lin Yu just smiled and said, it's absolutely true, there is no falsehood at all, I definitely didn't lie to you. That is to say, it was my wife who really saved the catastrophe in the prehistoric world, right? Did she get into trouble later? Lin Yu shook his head. No, and she has a high status. Everyone in later generations praises her achievements. Not only that, she is also called the ancestor of the human race. The man nodded slightly. I know this. He became a saint a few days ago because he created the human race. I didn't expect my wife to be so powerful. This really surprised me. At this moment, Lin Yu didn't know what kind of mood he should have. After all, looking at this guy, he should have a great relationship with him. Then can you tell me what the relationship between the two of us is? I am you, and you are me. The man said this again, but Lin Yu still found it difficult to understand. The man just smiled. It's just two people in different times and dimensions. It's normal. There was you in the previous second and there is you in the next second. You are you. It's that simple. Although the man said it lightly, Lin Yu was confused. After a while, Lin Yu just smiled, waved his hand, and shook his head. Whatever, this matter is not so important. After the two looked at each other, they just laughed out loud. And at this time, Lin Yu suddenly remembered that King Yu of Zhou used his magical powers to send himself here to find Bao Xi's soul, that is, the last soul of the 3 souls and 7 spirits. Please do me a favor. What favor? Help me find Yi Po. I wonder if you can find him. When did that person die? At the beginning of the reincarnation, there are indeed many people who died in the future who will return to the beginning of the reincarnation, which is now. But I know very little about this reincarnation, but my wife may know something. After hearing what the man said, Lin Yu nodded gently. Then let's go ask Nuwa, what do you think? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 249. The man nodded slightly. Of course there's no problem with that, I'll ask now. After the man finished speaking, he flew back in the original direction. At this time, Lin Yu was also taken into his sea of consciousness by him. Lin Yu could see what he saw and hear what he thought, but he could not control his consciousness. Extraterritorial Dojo. When Nuwa saw Lin Yu come back, she was naturally very excited. You are so willing to come back. There was quite a bit of resentment in Nuwa's words. At this time, Lin Yu just scratched his head and smiled. Who on earth made my wife so unhappy? I won't teach him a lesson. Nuwa's eyes stared straight at Lin Yu. That person is far away in the horizon and right in front of you. After Lin Yu heard Nuwa say this, he just smiled like this, and there were some complex colors in his eyes. I did have something to deal with just now, but there is something else I want to ask you. After Nuwa heard what Lin Yu said, she nodded slightly. She gently picked up the teacup and placed it in front of Lin Yu. Then she picked up the teacup in front of her and sipped it gently. Take a bite. A refreshing fragrance goes straight to the heart. Whatever you want, just ask. Regarding the matter of reincarnation, an old friend asked me to find the soul of one person. I'm afraid the old friend you are talking about is yourself. Nuwa just said this unhurriedly. At this time, after hearing what Nuwa said, Lin Yu's eyes also evoked a bit of strange brilliance, and he nodded slightly after a moment. Yes, it's me in later generations, but the soul of the person I asked about has little to do with me, but it has a lot to do with another person. After Nuwa heard Lin Yu say this, she nodded slightly, and a special color flashed in her beautiful eyes. I understand. At the beginning of reincarnation, there is a realm of reincarnation. You need that person's soul to guide you. If you steal into this realm of reincarnation, you can bring back the last soul. After Lin Yu heard what Nuwa said, a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes. At this time, he nodded heavily. I know you must have a way, madam. But in this realm of reincarnation, now where exactly? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Nuwa's mouth, and there was a hint of helplessness in her eyes. To be honest, I don't know where the realm of reincarnation is now, so it's quite a headache. Ah! Nuwa turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu, her eyes full of helplessness. When Lin Yu heard this, after Nuwa said this, her expression condensed slightly, and then she nodded lightly. But are there any clues or anything like that? After thinking for a moment, Nuwa seemed to suddenly remember something. There are indeed clues. To the north of the East China Sea, there is the Sea of Biming. In this Sea of Biming, there is a place of reincarnation. The stage of reincarnation may be on the stage of reincarnation. Even if you don't board the stage of reincarnation, you might still be able to find some clues, but... When Nuwa said this, she suddenly stopped in his eyes, with a hint of fear in her eyes, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. At this time, Lin Yu could clearly tell that Nuwa seemed to be a little worried at this moment, so at this time, he turned his head and glanced at Nuwa. You have something on your mind? How about we talk about it? Nuwa smiled. Actually, it's not a big deal. It's just that the place is extremely dangerous. Husband, if you go there, you must take me with you. You must not go into danger alone. I'm afraid something will happen to you. Lin Yu smiled and rubbed Nuwa's little head, with a rather doting look in his eyes. Don't worry, nothing will happen. Is it possible that you still don't trust your husband? When Nuwa heard what Lin Yu said, she could only smile and nod. I can trust you, of course I trust you, but you'd better be careful. Lin Yu nodded slightly. Madam, please rest assured. With such a beautiful lady like a flower and jade, I don't dare to get into trouble myself, no. You know how to have fun with me. This Nuwa also became coquettish for a while. If an outsider saw Nuwa with such a charming look, they would definitely be shocked. Even Lin Yu was a little surprised after seeing the scene in the Sea of Consciousness. Lin Yu just smiled and shook his head, and then sighed faintly. Well, if people in this world know that I have such a relationship with Nuwa, then I'm afraid, I have become the public enemy of men in the world, but who made me look so handsome? Even Nuwa is fascinated. After the space-time beast heard what Lin Yu said, 3 black lines appeared on its forehead. Master, you can take a look in the mirror later. Lin Yu. Do you believe that I will make soup for you soon? Space-time beast. Master is the most handsome man in the world. Lin Yu nodded with satisfaction. That's pretty much it. I like honest people the most. Don't talk nonsense in the future. Do you hear me? At this time, the space-time beast was also in tears, but he just smiled and didn't say anything more. In the ancient tomb, the face of King Guzhu was as gloomy as water dripping out. Time passed by, but there was no news from Lin Yu. Even King Zhou was a little confused at this moment. What Lin Yu was doing at this moment? King Guzhu turned his head and glanced at King Zhou, with a complex look in his eyes. Do you think that kid will not work for us? After hearing what King Guzhu said, King Zhou just waved his hand and smiled gently. You don't have to worry about this. This little guy is still very reliable. Since he has come, you should make peace with him. If you use people, you don't doubt them. If you doubt people, you don't use them. I believe you also know this truth. Let's wait and see. At this time, King Guzhu seemed to want to say something else, but he swallowed it back when it came to his lips, because King Zhou had already closed his eyes and rested. At this time, in the Dragon Country, a man was walking on the street. That man was from the Ye family. He also participated in the expedition this time, but he was born spoiled and couldn't stand it, so he gave up in advance. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 250. At this moment, Lin Yu's photo suddenly appeared on the big TV screen. After all, Lin Yu's performance this time was really eye-catching. Others didn't know about Lin Yu, but Ye Chen confirmed that they had met once before. Although it was only from a distance, you could tell that there was something extraordinary about Lin Yu. This guy is not an ordinary person. If the time and space beast he possesses can be taken out one day, it will be a great good thing for our entire family. When Ye Chen thought of this, a special color flashed in his eyes, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this moment, he had a bold plan in his mind formed in it. But after a moment, Ye Chen seemed to suddenly remember something, and then he shook his head. No, if he comes out of that secret realm now, he will definitely be jealous of everyone, then it will be difficult for me to do it. Now I must find a perfect way, but... When Ye Chen thought of this, a hint of helplessness flashed in his eyes. After all, this perfect method is easier said than done. Linrura jumped to Ye Chen's side. At this time, a special color flashed in Ye Chen's eyes. Now Ye Chen is indeed pursuing Linrura. What he likes is Linrura's beauty, and he suddenly remembered that Lin Yu seems to be somewhat similar to this Linrura. On this complexion, between the eyebrows there are some similarities. Linrura glanced at the big screen, and a special color flashed in her eyes. This really looks like my missing brother. The speaker is unintentional, but the listener is intentional. At this time, after Ye Chen heard Linrura say this, he turned his head and glanced towards him, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. Meaning, stop joking with me here, do you know who this person is? After Linrura heard what Ye Chen said, she also shook her head slightly. I don't know, who is this person? Is it possible that he is very powerful? When Ye Chen heard what Linrura said, he also pretended to be amazed. Oh, this man is not only powerful, he is simply too powerful. But you don't know the strange beast in him. Maybe even the members of these expeditions, the chief instructor may not be as high as those strange beasts on his body, but now he is definitely a rare master in the world. After Linrura heard what Ye Chen said, she nodded slightly. If my brother is still alive now, he might be about the same age as him now, but it's a pity that he disappeared a few years ago. My Lin family sent many people to look for him, but they never found him. After Ye Chen heard what Linrura said, a special color flashed in his eyes, and then he nodded lightly. I see, it seems that after all these years, you must miss your brother too. After Linrura heard Ye Chen say this, she also nodded slightly at that time. The beauty was quite bitter, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. What can I do if I miss my brother? Maybe we have been separated forever by now. At this time, Linrura seemed to have suddenly remembered something. She turned her head and glanced at Ye Chen. By the way, brother Ye Chen, our contract is today. Ye Chen smiled. My company suddenly had some changes, so this investment may not be possible for the time being. Let's talk about it when we have the opportunity in the future. After Ye Chen finished speaking, he stood up and left. Linrura's eyes flashed with a bit of confusion. You must know that Ye Chen was chasing after her before this. Let alone investing, before this, he would probably give up even if it cost his life. But Linrura despised Ye Chen. But now Linrura has taken the initiative to say that she wants to cooperate, not to mention that this project will be of great benefit to both parties. However, Ye Chen suddenly changed his mind, which was somewhat unexpected by Linrura. Linrura's beautiful eyes flashed with a bit of confusion. What on earth is going on with this guy? In fact, although Linrura did not express her relationship with Lin Yu, the first time Ye Chen saw Linrura, he felt that the two of them were somewhat similar. Maybe Linrura could be a stepping stone. It was precisely because of this that Ye Chen prepared to approach Lin Yu through Linrura, and precisely because of this, he pursued Linrura so much. As for why he rejected Linrura this time, it was of course to whet Linrura's appetite in order to retreat. Come on, play hard to get. Now this was Ye Chen's truest thought. A faint smile appeared on the corner of Ye Chen's mouth, and a hint of amusement flashed in his eyes. And just after this moment, Ye Chen seemed to suddenly remember something, but at this moment, his phone suddenly rang. The call was from his mother Xiaolin. "You brat, give you half an hour to go home quickly, I have something to tell you." After Xiaolin finished speaking, she hung up the phone. When Ye Chen heard the beeping sound from the other end of the phone, a flash of helplessness flashed across his face, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. But at this moment, he had no choice but to do as Xiaolin said. Ye Chen returned home. Xiaolin's eyes were staring straight at Ye Chen, with a bit of confusion in her eyes. "Tell me, why did you do that project with Linrura? As long as your brain is not in vain, you will know that there is definitely something wrong with that project. It is not an exaggeration that Linrura, a heartless woman, will be deceived by Qin Feng, but you don't should." After Ye Chen heard what Xiaolin said, he just smiled. "I refused." At this time, Xiaolin's eyes were full of disbelief. His eyes were staring straight at Ye Chen. "What? You said you refused? Is it true? You didn't lie to me." Bar. At this time, Ye Chen smiled. "What are you trying to do to lie to you? Everything I said is true. It's absolutely true." At this time, Xiaolin looked at Ye Chen with a somewhat different look. "But it's a bit weird for you to be like this. You have been pursuing that little girl before."